Robert Sullivan coming at you from Pensacola Beach, Florida, home of the U.S. Navy Blue Angels. In fact, on Tuesdays and Wednesday mornings when they practice, they fly over my office. So on Tuesdays and Wednesday mornings, I have to sneak out a couple hours and watch them practice. They're magnificent, magnificent. But anyway, today we're going to talk to you about the key relationship that drives profitability for an LTL carrier, and that key relationship is the percent of revenue to variable cost. And simply put, it is the revenue operations consumes to handle the freight that comes into the company, to move the shipments from origin to destination. That's variable cost. Talk about that a little more deeper in just a few moments. It is the key relationship for an LTL carrier, because the percent of variable cost to revenue determines your contribution margin that you have left over to cover the fixed cost and overhead of the company, and hopefully add to profitability. So it's a critical measurement. Also, the impact the percent of variable cost to revenue has on your break-even point is just absolutely powerful. And we're going to do a video on break-even point and relationship to variable cost. We'll get into that on another video, but it's something you really do need to understand. When I go into a carrier, usually the carrier from a profitability standpoint is kind of stagnant. It's, their profitability is not improving significantly, but thank goodness it's not declining significantly also. But so I usually find them sort of plateaus, sort of stagnant from a profitability standpoint, and that's driven by the variable cost as a percent of revenue. I can see by just looking at the financials, revenue will increase 8 to 10%, and you'll see that revenue line and that variable cost line just following each other perfectly as revenue increases, because they don't, in most cases, have a system to control that variable cost. So, and people are generally frustrated and want to be more profitable. It seems like the harder they work, the less result they get in terms of profitability. So most of the companies I go into have plateaued from a profitability standpoint. So the challenge is to improve that profitability. Improve profitability is to improve that variable cost as a percent of revenue. I can go into a carrier seriously and say, let me have your income statement. Take the profitability off the bottom of it. Just give me your income statement without your profitability. I can go through and break that income statement down into the TPG variable fixed format, and if that variable cost as a percent of revenue is 70% or higher, based on that format, I can look at the team and say, you're either at break even or you're probably losing money. And in most cases, I'm right on with that. So you want that number, typically it seems to be an industry number, but you really want that number to be in the low to mid 60s to be able to generate a profit level high enough to keep your employees, the quality of their life, improving through wage increases and benefits and etc., and also to be able to reinvest in the organization to remain competitive. So it's just one of those numbers that seems to hold true in the industry. So we're going to talk a little bit about this variable cost to percent of revenue. Now, when I say variable cost, let's define variable cost. Variable cost is the wage and fringe cost of your pickup and delivery drivers, your line haul drivers, it's your dock workers, it's your temporary help that you bring, temporary drivers you bring in, it's purchase transportation, it's all the cost that goes into variable cost that goes into put a P&D unit or a line haul unit on the road every day, and that is those things are such as fuel, tires, tolls, maintenance. So I think you kind of get the idea of what that number is. So typically when what it all boils down to, I generally find that the P&D operation, once you include the cost of the variable cost of running the equipment, will generally run about 26% of revenue, somewhere in that neighborhood. Line haul, if you're a regional carrier, probably 29 to 31% or somewhere along in there. Dock is usually about 6 to 7, 8% of revenue. Then we have what we'll call insurance and claims costs, which is our PLPD insurance, cargo insurance, and claims less salvage, and that generally runs 2.1%. Then you have your billing and collecting cost, the transaction cost of cutting that freight bill and getting the money back in is generally around 1.9%, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, as I said, you really want to keep that relationship in the mid-60s. That variable cost is a percent of revenue. Now, what I typically see, I go into companies also that are kind of they're seeing profitability decline, And generally the first thing that happens, cash flow gets a little tight. We all know that. And then you begin to see it show up in the profitability numbers. So when I go in and I see that the profitability is declining, the typical reaction that carriers have to that is that they will say, well, we need more revenue. So they'll go out and put on a push to bring more revenue in, and they'll start going after rate increases of current clients, which is a very, very big positive, very big positive. But they'll go out and bring new revenue on at a lower price, and so what they're doing is they're reducing the quality of that revenue that comes into the organization. Now, a funny thing happens to revenue when it hits a terminal. When revenue hits the terminal, it loses its identity. It becomes shipments. It becomes work that the operations department has to deal with and on the dock and P&D and in line haul. So that revenue loses its identity. So because most carriers have outdated systems or methodologies they use to manage that variable cost bucket and productivity, if you will, such as wages as a percent of revenue. I just don't understand that one. Wages as a percent of revenue, stops per trip or pounds per man hour, bills per hour, all these crazy things. Well, they're too macro. It's a very competitive environment out there today, and it's tough to make a buck. We all know that. So those measurements in terms of controlling productivity and variable costs are just too macro, too much in the mix. You have to get more granular than that. And then you throw in the paradigms the supervision has on what a person can and cannot do, and then you have a recipe that is just just twice as bad as it was. And when I say paradigm, a supervisor will say, oh, Robert here's got to drive 250 miles today, so he can only put off 8 stops. He's got a lot of driving to do. Well, may or may not be true. So anyway, but those paradigms. So what happens is the the variable cost container will begin to climb at a faster rate than the revenue container because you're reducing the quality of that revenue. So as that occurs, you have less contribution dollars. Once you cover your variable costs, you have less contribution dollars to cover the fixed cost and overhead of the company and generate any profitability that you desire. So as contribution dollars begin to decline, then profitability gets worse. So the next scenario I see companies will do, they'll go in and attack the fixed cost. They'll do things like say, okay, take company cars away, reduce wages, salaries, lay off salespeople. I've seen it all. But they'll go through and they'll attack that fixed cost bucket. And you can do that once, maybe twice, and that's what you call slash and burn. You can do that once, maybe twice, but then you're going to be right back where you were in a month or so, a couple of months. And in some cases, I've even seen it get much worse. And the reason you don't improve is because you've treated the symptom. The problem is the relationship of that variable cost to revenue bucket is out of whack, and your contribution dollars are declining, and you have to fix those two containers. It's the quality and quantity of revenue that you bring into the organization, and the variable cost of revenue operations consumes, which is variable cost to move that freight from origin to destination. So variable cost is a percent of revenue. That's your key number to manage profitability. And it can't just having a costing system that will show you the profitability of accounts will not take you to the dance. What happens in the marketplace sets the price in connection with the carriers and the customers. So just having a costing system is not necessarily the answer to your system that measures profitability of your customer. You need a system that also will give operations the opportunity to manage that variable cost on a day-to-day basis, the productivity of your P&D operation, the productivity of your line haul operation, productivity of dock operation, because you can't just throw more revenue at it and not improve the productivity or capacity utilization of your company because you're not improving the contribution dollars to cover the fixed cost and overhead of the company. Okay, I guess that's enough today. I appreciate you stopping by, I really do. And if you have any questions or would like to discuss this further, just drop me an email, give me a call. Would love to chat with you about it. I'm very, very passionate about that relationship of variable cost to revenue. So thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next video. Have a great one.